Hi, thank you so much for joining us today. Just do a quick intro. I'm Wendy Morgan. I'm the CEO and founder of Shift. And at Shift, we use virtual reality to train nurses. We say we care for those who care for us, and we're giving them the training that they deserve. But we're here today to talk about technology in healthcare and how that can impact the future of care delivery. So I have a wonderful guest here, Taylor. If you would introduce yourself and what you do, we'd love to hear about it.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me, Wendy. Super excited to be here. My name is Taylor McPartland. I'm the CEO of ScaleHealth, which is a health innovation marketplace. We're based in Southern California, but we really do two things on a global scale. We leverage technology to be able to identify, track, and accelerate the growth of really exciting, innovative technology companies in the health space, like Shift, and then we work with strategic partners, payers, providers, corporations, those that are looking for new cutting edge innovative ways to be able to provide care to their nurses, their doctors, their caregivers, their patients. And then, at the end of the day, we really aim to bring those two worlds together. So understanding what the needs and the goals are of payers and providers, understanding what the solutions are that are out there that are best of breed and best fit those needs, and then bring the two sides together to really accelerate impact, accelerate implementation, and make sure that everyone has access to the quality care that they need to live their healthiest lives.
Yeah. And, when we first met and you were telling me about what you were doing, I was like, oh, I would love to talk to you more about that because you have such a unique position. Because in my understanding, so you work with the startups and help them, and then you work with the hospital systems internationally, but then you stick with them. So it's not just a one and done deal. So you can really watch how incorporating these new technologies and, these big, slow moving institutions that are our healthcare systems, when they work with faster, smaller companies like ours, how does that impact and what benefits are these hospitals, caregivers, and the patients seeing over time with implementing the technology?
Yeah, great question. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Our goal really is to be that partner on both sides for the startup, for the technology company's entire life cycle, from their earliest idea stage all the way to and through their exit or their IPO. And then from a partner standpoint, really we want to continue to grow with them as well. We want to understand how their goals change, how their focuses change. Obviously, we look back at the last 3 years, 2 years, and 2021, and priorities have radically changed overnight. And we want to be there. So we want to be there. We want to be nimble. We want to be able to work fast as needed, and make sure that we can be that sidekick that understands what those needs are as they might change from a Tuesday to a Wednesday, and then on Thursday be ready with a solution that can get plugged in.
Right. Yeah. So that is exciting. And I know, as a startup, we can move really fast, but when, we're really focused on the other side. So, the hospital systems and the caregivers. So when you approach a hospital system, what do you see are their biggest barriers to looking at working with, let's focus more on the technology, not necessarily a startup, but we say, okay, we're going to come to you. Like there's Diligent Robotics, for example, and they've got Moxie, this really cool robot. I'm fascinated with it. So what are some of the objections that you encounter or barriers to a hospital adopting a new technology?
I think being an expert in the nursing space can really appreciate this. I think right now a lot of it's both bandwidth constraints and then a perception of bandwidth constraints. When we come in and our whole goal is to be able to say, hey, we understand the lack of bandwidth that we have. We want to be able to help free up time by plugging in solutions that do, accelerate your ability to give care and provide care, but also free up time of your staff, to be able to take that extra few minutes with each patient that really need it. But prior to be able to have those conversations, certainly during COVID, everyone is so stretched thin. All departments are so stretched thin that it's so much easier to be able to say, like, we don't have time to think about, and rightly so, we don't have time to think about something new. Everyone's very focused on what they're already doing, and so that's probably what we hear the most, what our companies hear the most.
Mm-hmm.
which isn't necessarily a no, but it ends up pushing out opportunities for implementation from, you know, from what could be a 1 or 2 month project to a 6 and 9 month project. So that's certainly a challenge. And from our standpoint, our hope is to be able to say, well, let's work within those bandwidth constraints, and let's understand how we can do the heavy lifting, because the startups are nimble. We're certainly nimble as kind of that intermediary body to understand where both parties are coming from and act as that translator. And knowing that all caregivers are stretched thin, like
that is nothing
let's
new.
respond accordingly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you've been in this space for a while. So when you hear that, which is something we hear a lot too, is, well, we just don't have time to think about this new thing, even though it could, provide something that's 4 times faster. Do you have data points that you've seen over time to say, if you could just take, it's a little bit of time, we'll manage the change for you, and the benefits you're going to see? Do you have data points around that from what companies you've worked with?
Yeah, what we have seen is there's 2 ways that we've really overcome the bandwidth constraint. Because as you say, it's nothing new. No one has time now. No one's going to have time 6 months from now. It's just that's the kind of industry that we're all in. It's just it's an understaffed industry of people who really care about the work they're trying to do, and that quality work takes time.
Yeah.
So what we end up doing is we say, okay, all we're looking for is really 2 hours of your time. 1 hour for us to really understand what your limitations are, what your goals are, what types of KPIs do you want to see out of a potential solution, what types of solutions are perfect fit for you, technologically speaking, budgeting all across the board. And then that's the first hour. And the second hour is for us, let's say 3 weeks, a month later, for us to bring you 3 companies that do fit that mold. And so we can work with a provider partner of ours, and we can say, like, okay, we have a clear sense of what you're looking for. Then we can turn around, we can come to you, Wendy, and say, okay, we've got an opportunity for Shift. We think it's an absolute bullseye because of X, Y, and Z. Let's do a little prep. Let's tell you about this partner that we're working with. Let's make sure that, when we get you in the room, that it's a slam dunk. And then what we do for that final hour is we line up those 3 to 5 companies that we believe to be really good fits. And then it's just up to the provider partner to say, like, yeah, I want to continue on conversations with these 3. This one's a little bit too early. This one, is a little bit too late, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're off to the races. And to your point, well, from a data perspective, we've seen about 60% of our companies, our startup companies that we present to providers, do go on to have those follow-up conversations. Mm-hmm. And from those initial contacts, we're seeing pilots stood up in 3 and 4 months,
wow.
And actually getting in front of patients, which I think is, in the midst of everything that's going on right now, is pretty phenomenal. And so that's all we look at as a real proof point for us to be able to make sure that we're able to deliver those kind of quality solutions that accelerate impact and have meaningful impact for both parties.
Yeah. And do you ever have the care providers come back to you and say, oh, you were so right, I gave you 2 hours and it's saving me so much time? Does that happen?
That's the number one thing we hear, I would say, is that, how much time we have saved them. Because, the status quo is, as being an entrepreneur, like, it's a lot of relationship building. It's a lot of cold calling. It's a lot of pitching a number of people to try to find the right person who can actually make the decision or have sway on the final decision. And then on the flip side, it's a lot of the providers going as saying, okay, I have this particular need. Now I need to scour all the accelerators or all funds or, LinkedIn, wherever it might be, to try to find the best solution. And it just takes a lot of time on both sides. Yeah. If we can say, like, X hospital meet Shift, you 2 talk to each other, we can cut that down to an hour or less on both sides. And then both parties can leave, or I should say the provider then can leave saying, okay, I've seen the 3 best solutions out there, and either there's some that are a good fit for me and I can move forward with them, or I need to, there is no good fit out there for me. So I need to
build it in house.
build it myself if I've got the budget for that, or just kind of figure out a different workaround.
Yeah, you got the song Matchmaker running through my head, so you put the pieces together. But earlier you had said the perfect technology, which is the perfect fit. So when you talk about future, thinking forward, because we are going to come out of this pandemic, and at the same time, this experience has shaken the healthcare system to its core, and everyone we talk to worldwide says something has to change. So when we look forward, what do you think are some of the biggest technologies that are going to have the biggest impact as they're adopted into the hospital systems?
Great question. I think we're going to see more integration between virtual care, telemedicine, and traditional medicine. I think there's still a disconnect there that, there are some great companies out there that are starting to address that, but really creating that smooth handoff, I think, is going to be critical. We've seen such a seismic shift towards telemedicine during COVID, and that certainly has had tremendous adoption out of necessity. But as we look ahead, like there needs to be a smooth handoff from that telemedicine physician that you might could potentially never meet again to your actual GP or specialist or ER, without you as the patient, who is sick, who is stressed, having to go repeat all the same information all over again.
Right.
And so
what technologies might help with that? Like if we talk about, of course, we're in virtual reality, but then there's AI, and then there's AR, and there's robotics. What technologies do you think will be incorporated to help with that transition?
That's a great question. I don't know if I necessarily see it as particular types of technology, but a technology that is adopted by systems that do have that reach into a patient's home. You consider like a remote monitoring or everything else. I think where we run into issues where one solution is a great AI or a telemedicine solution, and then we still have to go into the 2018, 2019 reality to be able to, meet our traditional doctors for next steps. But I think and we're starting to see it, but I think if we can accelerate the implementation of new technology with our traditional healthcare providers, then it's going to create much more of a continuity of care all the way across the line.
Absolutely. I agree. And continuity of care is huge. Any other up and coming technologies that you're like, keep an eye on? If you were speaking to someone in a hospital system, like, we're looking at technology in general for our future. What do you think are some of the big players?
Honestly, I think, I know I'm playing to the audience a little bit, but we're seeing a tremendous amount of momentum and necessity in the nursing space. I think, and I think it's a space that a lot of entrepreneurs have overlooked. They think about selling to doctors, how to address a doctor's issue. But, if there's challenges with doctors, then that same challenge has existed with nursing for, years, most likely. And so, we're seeing a lot of need from our partners around the nursing space, around providing more opportunities to alleviate some of the burden around the staffing up. And I think that's an area that we're going to continue to see a lot of growth in. I think also, we do quite a bit of work with community and with rural hospitals, and looking at more remote hospitals, looking at ways to be able to provide, potentially through an AR or a VR capability, provide access to specialists that they wouldn't otherwise have access to. I think it provides a tremendous opportunity to provide game-changing care in really small facilities, and also drive revenue in a lot of these smaller hospitals that are budget constrained and looking for new ways to be able to provide high quality care. So I would say, not just because I'm speaking to you, I would say the VR world and the nursing world are two big areas of focus.
Yeah, I appreciate the nod. We are seeing that as well. And, nurses are the foundation of care. They're your initial through point and final point of care. And so, unfortunately, it is an area that has been overlooked. And this crisis is showing us, as they exit the field, that we can't do this without them. And so, focusing on their needs, particularly at this time, is really important. And we are seeing that, scale is hospital systems, care providers, all of them are realizing that that training historically has been one human interacting with one other human to do any of their training. And as things change, that just can't be anymore. And so, in our conversations, we're seeing more of which technologies can we adopt that take what is good and what we already had and can scale it, or in some cases can completely overhaul what we were doing, because we now see that we were tolerating this that wasn't great and now we just can't do it anymore. So things like just-in-time training and that continuity of care now between telemedicine and face-to-face. So.
And I think also one interesting through line that both sides of the equation, both the innovator, the technologists, and the providers can really work to improve, is just better understanding how the other side thinks and operates.
Tell me more about that.
Well, just thinking about it, like you were saying earlier, startups move really quickly. It's in our DNA to see a problem, fix a problem, and then identify customers that are having that problem and convert them into being clients. The challenge within the healthcare industry is that it's a much more cumbersome billing process and decision-making process. It's not as easy as I'm going to sell to this person and this person is going to use my product. But articulating that, having the health system kind of know that going in and have develop a chain of command where if they have an innovation department or someone that's overseeing the BD or their strategy, have a pathway for that innovator to be able to get educated, to move through a chain of command to get to a decision maker seamlessly without getting unnecessarily or unknowingly roadblocked just by not understanding the administrative mechanisms within a hospital. I think would be really huge. So
they are complex.
They are. And startups really need to better understand how that process works. Just because you have a solution that a nurse will use does not necessarily mean, and most likely does not mean, that the nurse is the one that's actually going to be buying it. But how can you develop those internal champions, work with those champions to gain some mind share within the system and like showcase your value, and then be able to secure that partnership within a number of months versus a number of years. And so I think that's a big area of concern and a big area that's really slowing down the industry. But it's also the flip side of that as well. I'm constantly surprised how often we're talking to health systems that don't know how to engage with startups or with innovators and have a clear sense of what their need is, have a clear sense of their budget and what they're willing to buy for a solution, but don't know where to look to find that best solution. And so kind of educating themselves on that ability to go out and source solutions and identify the right ones is I think is critical. We're trying to address both sides, but I think it's an area that continues to need more and more work.
I absolutely agree. It's a good point, that shared language around innovation, the need for innovation, and then how do you communicate it? So, my background is in higher ed, and I was just on a call making a joke. It's like I learned all the acronyms and all the things in higher ed, and now I'm in this space with nursing, and it's all new acronyms, all new. If we could find that shared language, because each group is seeking a solution, and that ultimately for the well-being of our caregivers and then our own well-being, because we're getting the care that we need and can actually have access to that care. So it's mutually beneficial. You're seeing that, you've seen it for years, but where is that shared language? How do we get that ability to navigate each other's worlds? So that is a challenge that may be beyond a startup, but it is a movement. I think I'm seeing more and more conferences and sessions around how do we bring the innovation that's within healthcare and without together for better solutions. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the mandate and the responsibility of companies like ScaleHealth and forums like this, where we have an opportunity to talk and to shine some light on these disconnects, or on conferences as well. Like, go out of their way to be able to bring both sides to the table and have meaningful conversation, because there is supply and demand on both sides. And I don't think that, certainly as we're continuing to work our way through COVID, we're seeing the the disconnect gets smaller and smaller, and both sides coming closer and closer together. And so any mistranslation going on, I think, is becoming more and more minute. So it's up to conferences, it's up to ScaleHealth to say, like, all right, get in the same room. Let's talk this out, because the needs and the solutions are right here, right in front of us, and let's get on the same page. It might take a little bit of hand holding at the beginning. I'm sure it will, but I think it's very much in our collective abilities to address.
Mm-hmm. I agree. So we've got the conferences, we've got organizations like yours, ScaleHealth, that can help that. But if you were looking at talking to a CNO and they're like, we have to have a solution. Do you have a tip or two to say, aside from going to a conference, what's a way to begin integrating innovation or technology? Because we talk to a lot of CNOs and they actually get the friction as well. They may be innovative and ready to embrace this, but again, it's a very large bureaucracy, and they have to sell an idea upstream and downstream in order to get buy-in and to get movement. So any tips for, let's say, a CNO who's ready to innovate, ready to bring in the technology that they know will be of benefit, something that they could do?
I would say a couple things. First off, being very clear on what their goals are. What is a realistic timeline that they would want to implement a solution, and then realistically could implement it. Because inherently, as that timeline is going to be very different from a startup's timeline. And so being clear about that, being clear about budget, is this something that, if it's a pilot, is it going to be a free pilot? And if so, like, what is the possibility of a paid engagement after that? What KPIs need to be hit to make sure that, if the startup hits those goals, that there is opportunities to continue to grow this relationship. And then being as clear as possible on any technological requirements. What compatibility does that startup need to come to the table with in order for it to be able to smoothly be integrated into what's already happening, what's already working, what's already being used within in the hospital. And I think those are the key things. I think in order to be able to identify solutions, certainly there's a number of ecosystems, both nationally and locally, depending on where CNO might be based, that can open those doors to startups. I think I'm part of an organization called Together Health that I'm lucky enough to sit on the steering committee of, and there's about a dozen or more steering committee members of local ecosystems all around the country that are have a great understanding of their local community and what solutions are out there, and would love to be able to work with more hospitals and CNOs. And then there's organizations like ScaleHealth that do similar work in terms of being able to connect those dots together, connect CNOs, connect the two solutions, but on a more national, technologically driven scale. So, always happy to have conversations or make referrals where it makes the most sense. But I think the groundwork comes from a point of really being as clear as possible on what the expectations are, and being able to answer the questions that the startup is going to need to have answered to be able to see if it's something that makes sense.
That's great. Thank you. Those answers are very beneficial, both for me and I think for our audience as well, because as we've both been pointing out, I think we can safely say that there's a broad acceptance of I would go beyond saying need, but it's a demand for innovation now in order for our healthcare systems to survive what we are in.
And I also think and this might be a tangent, but also kind of related to the same topic, is the word innovation. I'm not sure if I think it's a benefit or a hindrance to get plugged into some of these conversations, because it's defined differently, and by pretty much every hospital that I talk to. If there's a head of innovation, if there's an innovation department, we talk to, as I was talking, as I mentioned earlier, we work with a lot of smaller organizations that say they can't afford innovation because it's something that many times is seen as something that is either not a requirement, not a core part of business, something that would be great to have, but not core to driving strategy or driving care. I think that's really a misconception of what innovation is. I mean, innovation to me is really, being that translator and really understanding what what solutions are out there that enable us to do our job better. If we have an actual team that we want to call an innovation team that can execute on that or find that, fantastic. That's great. Generally, that's reserved for the larger systems across the country, but there's always a strategy team. There's always a business development team. There's always, CNOs, CMOs, CEOs that are tasked with, finding better, more cost-effective solutions to do their job better. And that's where innovation can get plugged in. And I think that's where innovation is, as we're looking ahead, that's really where it's critical. And so, but yeah, I'd say I don't necessarily know if the word innovation is a good thing or a bad thing, but I think the action of it is a necessary thing as we look into the rest of 2022 and beyond.
Mm-hmm. That is an excellent point. That we do a lot of work with perspective taking. And so from where I sit, innovation is all that, right? But it can be scary and seem expensive and overwhelming. Our goal, of course, is to help as many people as possible. So not excluding anyone in the conversation by using a term that maybe is, wait, we can't afford to be innovative just yet. Yeah,
exactly. And it means so many different things. It can mean, we have an accelerator, or it can mean we have our nurses, our physicians develop IP and we spin that out into its own company. Or it can mean like we're out sourcing solutions externally that we want to bring in and address issues. It can mean we do hackathons periodically or anything else. But yeah, since there is no common thread, it's hard to rebut like the comment of like, oh, we can't afford an innovation team, or we already have a team that's doing innovation, when really no one can have too much business development or too clear of a strategy or provide too much quality of care.
Yeah.
And so, and all of those things can be augmented by more innovation.
Yeah. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I really appreciate your time. I love getting other points of view. And again, when we first met, I was like, wow, that's very unique, because you get to a little bit higher and seeing both sides even internationally. So I really appreciate the time that you've given me and us, the audience, to have some insight into what is innovation and how to get there. Because we all need to work together on this, because everyone that I've met, it really is passionate about moving the needle in the same direction, which is the care of the carers and the patients. So it's been a great conversation. Do you have any last things you'd like to add, a parting comment?
No, I think you hit on it. Everyone does have the same core goal, same core vision. I don't think there are many entrepreneurs out there who are dedicating their lives to the health space that don't have a personal tie, or they're not doing it for a particular reason. Anyone in this industry is in this industry because they care about improving quality of care. They care about improving lives of people and patients and humanity. And so I think that gives me a lot of confidence that whatever mistranslations we'll have between technologists and providers, we'll get through it, because we do have the same common desire and same common goals. And if the last couple of years has shown us anything, is that we need to work together to get to the other side. So no, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to join you today and share my 2 cents where it makes sense. And I'm excited to keep the conversation going.
Yes, me as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.